Okay, so I guess, Anna, you're going to be up next talking about the law enforcement study.
And I'll do a little prelude for you. So you do, we did send out, guys, the law enforcement study. So you've got it electronically because it's a long study. We also have a few copies over on the table for those who really want late night reading to fall asleep with, guaranteed. There are a couple sections that Anna's going to talk about that will keep us intrigued. But the main purpose, of course, of the law enforcement study that was done earlier this year by the legislature was to look at both CJCT and kind of do the research as to the background and history and where that program is at, and then looking at the community college systems and how we could perhaps complement and or help or work together and or not. But Anna was the main researcher. Ryan Davis was the lead manager for this particular contract with CSW. Ryan has subsequently left the organization, and actually now Anna is going to work for the city? King County.
I'm moving to the Community and Human Services.
Oh, good. Well, then you'll be, so she happens to live here in Seattle area, so she volunteered to do a fairly good detailed briefing on the items that they found out in the study. And the main issue, and of course, one of the reasons that Bobby and Cindy are here too with the criminal justice programs is because the criminal justice programs, so work group that meets all 20 programs, the center facilitates those quarterly meetings. And Bobby has agreed to co-chair that group with me and Ryan Leonard, who had been chairing from Big Bend, actually is moving to Renton and with her husband, and will not be running criminal justice programs, but hopefully will return to work for us as a part-time regional coordinator. So anyway, we'll talk about kind of where we're at with all the work that we've been doing with the criminal justice programs and their curriculum, and as part of Anna and as Anna walks through the presentation. But I went through it last night and reminded myself, I've read it several times, but good job on the PowerPoint. Thank you and thank you so much for agreeing to be here today. So it's all your work.
Share the work that we've done. Just tell you what, I can take the keyboard. Sometimes I don't go in the order of my slides, which is why I'm do more presentations. Yeah, so thank you so much, Linda, for kind of setting up the introduction. So CSW, like Linda mentioned, myself and Ryan Davis, between October of last year, January of this year, worked with the Office of Financial Management, so OFM, on this study. Working with OFM, they kind of set out a scope of work for us, and that's kind of the agenda I have for this presentation, is kind of to walk through the different, the 4 areas that we kind of drilled into. You know, I have some time to answer questions, but I also feel free to ask them as they come up. I feel like sometimes that works a little better. So, you know, what we really did is to chunk out this work. I was really understanding the current state of basic law enforcement academy in Washington State. How does it benchmark to national trends? And, you know, how could the community college system be involved? And so there was some comparison of, you know, what's currently offered at the college level, and where did there seem like there was overlap or perhaps not overlap. So to start out, we really took a national lens of things. Our primary methods were using some data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. They do I think it's about every 5 years, a census of law enforcement training. This is a beautiful data set for us to kind of compare where Washington fits into the mix. I also did an in-depth deep dive across the at, you know, what's their hour requirements, what kind of curriculum do they cover, how do new law enforcement recruits enter academies? Are they first hired by their state agency, like it is here in Washington? Some have the option to self-select. So we did a lot of that. So some kind of major takeaways, just kick things off, is, you know, of course, every state has its post agency, the standards agency. Here it's the CJTC. What we found is like the detail and the depth of what their training standards are varies greatly by state. There's some states where it's a single page on a website. There's some states like Minnesota where it's a 50-plus page document that has learning outcomes and looks very much like a college, community college and learning outcomes curriculum. And not unsurprisingly, Minnesota is a state where you have a 2-year associate's degree is the Hughes Academy. So every recruit exits the academy with an associate's degree. Across the nation, we're finding that there's a shortage of qualified applicants. That might not be surprising to hear in this room. You know, what was difficult to ascertain was what the causal elements are to that. We suspect some of it has to do with just a tight labor market, you know, the low unemployment rate, there's a lot of competition for jobs, and that kind of leaves the pool of applicants small across all industries. And so unsurprising that we would see it here as well. There's also, you know, there was some elements of just restructuring of police agencies and different backgrounds that might be, you know, an upward demand of open positions. So there's a lot of reasons that we can't really kind of define exactly what the causal element was there. And what we're seeing more and more of as we look across the 50 states is there's the embracing of a problem-based or scenario-based learning room. So kind of actually going through mock scenarios and really kind of that hands-on learning. But what we find, especially at academies that aren't connected to community colleges, is that there's little assessment connecting those learning outcomes to job performance. There's little assessment and evaluation going on there in terms of what students are learning and what their aptitude is. Some other national trends. So we found that, you know, the average hours of basic police academy is 843. It's up 80 hours from the last time this census was taken in 2006. So we're just seeing more and more, you know, hours, longer periods of training. Graduation rates from academies are relatively high, and we found that academies that have some sort of connection to academic institutions have a slightly higher completion rate. I will say the data there is a little spotty at times because by and large, most police recruits enter a basic law enforcement academy already hired by their agency. The element there, it kind of passed that initial screening, so the graduation rate might just be you check the boxes, now you can continue, as opposed to what you would see, for example, in an academic institution where it's tied to your learning, your academic performance. From the national census, we saw that we were kind of interested in trying to understand dropout rates. Like we said, the completion rates are really high, so these are very minimal. And from what's reported to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, is categorized as voluntary withdrawal, academic performance, physical standards, illness and injury, firearm performance, and disciplinary, which I think is pretty intuitive there. We did do some deeper research into looking at what other studies existed out there, and from the recruit perspective, it's just kind of interesting to see from the recruits themselves who dropped out why they were citing dropout, and they cited stress, you know, some conflicting, you know, they go in with an expectation of what it is, what this academy is going to be and what it's going to be like, and that conflicts with their actual experience. They might be disappointed to drop out. And then some aversion to the more traditional style of the academy, which is really kind of follows that military structure. Then of course, academic initiated resignation. So this is, basically being kicked out for either academic or disciplinary reasons. And it was interesting just to think about equity and gender. Women were more likely to drop out citing gender discrimination. That's just from one study that we found. There's not a lot of data on that, but I think it's interesting that when you think about kind of that equity piece and who's entering academy and who's actually graduating academy, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there.
Anna, one of the things that we're going to be talking about today as a board is how we go about involving be more inclusive and more diversity in our emergency management all hazard programs, and how to recruit and include women and color, etc. And so I was just interested in your data. Do you have data sets that you gathered that looks at the diversification of the graduate, who is in the system currently, nationally? And
so this study from Arizona, and I can provide the citation for it, is from what I found was the most detailed. It was more detailed on the gender front, so I can't quite remember the statistics off the top of my head, but it was fairly equal distribution of people entering the academy, but it was men graduating at far higher rates than women. Some other research that we've done suggests, it's part of being inclusive is having instructors that represent your student base, having more women instructors, things like that. It's hard because police academies, we have found, it was true in Washington State, and it was true in some other states that we looked at, don't really do a good job at collecting the demographic data of the recruits that enter the academy. Part of that is because these are recruits that have been hired by home agencies and are being sent to the academy, and so a lot of that data exists at the hiring agency and is then not collected again at the academy level. That's what we found here in Washington. One of our recommendations, probably buried somewhere in the report, was, if that's a question that you have, to be able to assess it, you have to collect it in the first instance. So it's hard. It was a tricky one to dig into, and we weren't able to really find a lot of robust.
Okay, well, I'd sure love to, and we would like to take a look, because that's going to be one of our main thrusts for the coming years, is how do we diversify, because our career pathway is not diversified.
Right. Yeah. We
Across the country.
We hear a lot of anecdotal stuff, but it's not necessarily at the level of being able to present it as a core finding, for sure. So I think it's something to continue to think about how do we look into this. So this looks at, I apologize for the tiny map. I just tried to, I have a problem of trying to cram too much into a slide, but we really tried to look at, as far as our national scan, what's the composition of police academies across the country? How are they offered? What does it look like? How does Washington compare? This is a slide I know we presented to folks who were at the this time last year. We presented to the program managers for the colleges. So this might look familiar. So we kind of broke it out into 4 different categories. The first is the Central Academy. That's what's currently here in Washington State. So that's the light color, the lightest color on the map. So it's one centralized academy. It's usually run by the post accreditation boards. In this case, in Washington's case, it's the CJTC. There's some benefits to that. There's standardized training because the post is delivering the training. Anytime something happens with the standards, there's some benefits to having that centrally located. But it does limit the ability to customize and deliver training to a more diverse audience. We looked at, so for example, the regional academy, the next model that we looked at, we saw that the ability to customize is really there. So in California, for example, there's a regional model. So if you're at a regional training facility up in the mountains, you're learning about emergency vehicle operations and snow conditions, it's a more rural area, you're learning a lift, it's more tailored as opposed to if you were with like LAPD and you're learning about urban environments. So there's ability to customize there. There is challenges there. So again, because the Centralized Academy has that ability to kind of standardize across all recruits, some of that oversight and standardization is lost. There is some additional administrative bureaucracies that we found. So because the host agency then has to go and accredit these different regional places, that just adds another level of, another step in the process. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, but just something that we came across. Some states we find and this is kind of, it's really growing. We called it a hybrid model. So it's a blend of a post-run academy. It might be just a central academy that, recruits from across the state go to. But in addition to that, there's college-run or even private institutions that run basic law enforcement training in tandem. Often with the hybrid model, they also allow what's called sponsorship or non-sponsorship. So usually the Central Academy would be reserved for police officers who've been hired by agencies and then sent to the Central Academy, whereas a recruit can opt to self-sponsor. So if you really, you want to go into law enforcement, there's not an opening at your local jurisdiction, but you really want to go through the training, this is your career path. You have the option to go to a community college and maybe a private institution that offers basic law enforcement training, and you can pay your own way through, and then do the same exact training as the sponsored recruits get, but the only difference is at the end of training, you still have to go and find a job, and that you're self-paying. You're not getting support from your hiring agency. So that's becoming a lot more common, and that we're finding. So that is looking at the hybrid model. It's this darker color blue up there. There's not really, we've kind of tried to figure out, are there trends across geographies of like what kind of states offer what kind of training. It seems like rural states might have more centralized academies than not, but other than that, there's really not a lot of trends going on here. With the hybrid model, you do see some of the same oversight and standardization issues. I have a slide on sponsorship next, so I'll save kind of the pros and cons there. And finally, there are 2 states that it's a 2-year college degree program. So any police recruit who's been hired by their agency has to go through this 2-year program. They walk out with not only their certification to be a law enforcement officer, but an associate's degree. And there are some reciprocity agreements there, so if you do have college credits, they can be applied, and your time at the academy is lowered. But it's a very interesting model. In Minnesota, it's been in place for 30 years, so it's kind of like, we talked to some folks from Minnesota, and it's interesting because it's just a tried and true method. They're like, why would you do it any other way? Wisconsin, I think it's been in the last 10 or so years that they've been transitioning over, and they have a lot of challenges, pluses and minuses there. It's been a big lift for them to do that switch.
Do you know, and I'm not sure if it's Minnesota or Wisconsin, but I went to a presentation a few years back. I think it was probably Minnesota, about the amazing, they do a tremendous tracking of their students and their training and certifications.
Probably Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, and the folks we talked to like I said, it's been the way it's been for 30 years. And so there's the current, the current veterans on the force, that's what they did to become an officer. There's a lot of this institutional culture and knowledge around that 2-year degree model that it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's really interesting to kind of see the longer something's been in place, the more there's just like a robust system built around it. So they do have like pretty good data collection, and it's woven into the college system in a really incredible way. Folks that we talked to kind of, insinuated that yes, you did that, but that was to do that in the 1970s versus to try to do it in a more recent era. There might be more bureaucratic roadblocks and hurdles in the way, but it is pretty cool model. That I enjoyed reading about.
So, and I'm trying to remember if you got this much depth, but looking at maybe what would be some of the outcomes that the different models would hope for with their students, like
Yeah.
learning objectives. Was there anything that you saw as far as the learning objectives who did a better job of accomplishing those learning objectives?
It's hard to say because, so the data source, this is looking, I kind of skipped ahead a couple slides because it shows and there's another slide with additional learning areas, but these are essentially the core learning areas for all police academies across the state, and this is data pulled from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, their census of the training academies. Your question about the learning, like, who's doing it better, it's very hard to say, because what we were able to find and look through was the post standards set by the central state standards board. When you actually try to go into individual police academies and pull out that curriculum and those learning objectives, it was just nigh impossible, because it was one thing for a place like Washington that has a central academy that's connected to the post, that was a little easier. But when you get into these states that have 15 different regional academies, or different, mix of community colleges and then private institutions that offer that are contracted to offer training, that's just not readily available and publicly available, and trying to get our hands on that was challenging. So the best we were able to do is look at the statewide post standards. Whether that's a good proxy about how the training is delivered on the ground is another question.
What do the numbers represent?
Hours. Yes. So I kind of jumped ahead, but after we did the kind of matrix of how police academies are offered in different states. We then took that national data and then compared it to what's being offered currently at the CJTC in Burien. And the data from Burien we did a full day site visit there. We were given access to their curriculum and learning outcomes, materials, and then we were given the based on their curriculum and the hours on the curriculum, we were able to kind of create what the Washington State BOLIA had. So these are at national, the first column is national averages of hours of instruction. The second column is where the current Washington BOLIA stands out, and then there's the plus or minus difference. Across the board, and actually going back just to give a little bit of a comparison about the training context, I mentioned the national average is 843 hours. Current Washington BOLIA training is 720, so it is slightly under the national average. However, the national average encompasses, there's a bit of a skew from regional organizations, regional-based academies that provide field training in addition to just the basic BOLIA instruction. Most states with centralized academies, that field training happens once you've graduated and you've gone back to your home agency. There's this additional training that has to happen in your local context. So when you actually look at post-run academies, the hours drop to 650. So in that instance, it's kind of like, Washington State falls within the middle. It falls within the middle of the kind of overall average, but it does have more hours of instruction than most other centralized post-run academies. So with that little background, I just wanted to do that before we jumped into these. So in that instance, we found that there are some pluses and minuses, but we found that by and large, current training falls fairly in line with national trends. There are some caveats. So you'll see, for example, health and fitness, Washington BOLIA only offers 8 hours. But what we found when we were doing the review of the curriculum, a lot of it's because that physicality and that physical education is actually being encompassed in problem-based learning scenarios that happen in defensive tactics or happen in other categories here. So it was a little hard to pull the things out because Washington Belia is pretty blended there, so they contextualize so much of their training within these other wider areas, and then Belia cadets are also encouraged to do their fitness goals on their own time. So that was a big one to call out there. I think it's the same similarly with the use of force. I think a lot of that's contextualized into some of the defensive tactics and firearms training. But other than that, it does fall pretty in line. There's areas where, like criminal and constitutional law, where there's just a whole lot more training than national averages. Same with the police patrol procedures. Yeah, so we did a comparison. I don't know if there's any questions there, because we kind of want to get full of them into the numbers. I apologize for that. The second thing we looked at when we went to the current CJTC was, in addition to their hours and the curriculum, we were wanting to know what's their continuous improvement. And given that policing and many other careers, but policing in particular, is kind of always in constant evolution. Laws change, different statutes are enacted, there's different methods out there. How quickly, we were kind of asking the question, how quickly is curriculum updated? And we found that there's actually a pretty robust system in place at CJTC for this continuous improvement. Interestingly, it's really tied to job. They do a pretty robust job task analysis that actually looks at, okay, what are the core competencies of a police officer, and how do we tie back those core competencies to learning outcomes? And that's something just in CSW's other research and other workforce areas you don't see that. I mean, you see it, but what CJTC is doing was pretty surprising and impressive from what we have seen in our other areas of practice.
Do you know how long they have been doing the analysis of the core competencies?
I think I think within the last 4 or 5 years. I'd have to double check that, but it was it's relatively new. It hasn't been a long-standing practice. And I don't have it on the slide, but they the way that they've articulated 13 core competencies as a entry-level police officer that were very interesting, at least from our research perspective, to kind of then try to look at those core competencies and try to tie it back to the curriculum and what does that look like. And then finally, the last thing we looked at the CJTC was kind of their personnel and their facility assets. So looking at the instructors, there are 6 full-time instructors that really focus on defensive tactics, fitness, and firearms. And the rest of the instructors, and I know some of you here have been through the Belia, I think actually been TAC officers, so I might be preaching to the choir here, but the TAC officers that they have on their campus to actually deliver the instruction is a pretty unique model that we found. And so essentially a TAC officer is still a full-time police officer that's on loan for a 3-year contract from their local agency to go teach at the CJTC. So what we found was actually really interesting here. So you have a very diverse array of TAC officers from all over Washington, of all, not all, but of kind of a diverse, wide-ranging seniority level. So I believe the minimum requirement is 5 years of experience on the force before you become a TAC officer. But it was interesting to see, have people still relatively junior in their career, all the way up to long-standing veterans of the police force. So having that diversity in instruction, I thought was, there's something to it there. What we found in some of our national research was having that diversity, and specifically in your tenure on the force, can be really beneficial to basic law enforcement training, because you'll have folks that have seen a lot. They might be a little kind of rooted into how they've learned how to do things, and you'll have newer folks that kind of have a new generation of thinking things. And so there is some research there that says that having that age diversity and that seniority diversity can be very perspectives. And that's something that CJTC does through their task officers. And then when we look at the facilities, obviously their facility was built with the purpose of being a basic law enforcement academy. So they've got, in addition to classrooms and fitness training centers, they've got a firing range that was especially designed to be wider than kind of what you'd find at a recreational firing range. They've got a youth force simulator, some technical training buildings, dormitories. All the other dormitories are at capacity most of the time. And what you would expect to have at, in terms of food service and technology labs. So that was something as part of the what the state was asking us to look at, was looking at the capital costs of potentially, recreating a centralized academy elsewhere. And so looking at those capital costs was important for us. With that, so this is what we found as kind of the top 3 challenges that the current Belia system faces. So right now, and granted, our study was due to the state in January of last year, so the numbers are dated by about a year, but they probably still hold true. So as of November of last year, there was 110 officers waiting to attend Belia, and that could be a wait list of up to 3 months. They do have some sort of priority system about who can kind of jump the line if there's a need for it, but it's on average, I think 1 to 3 months of a wait. CJTC, so there's the core center in Burien, but recently they do have facilities in Spokane. And so between the 2 of them, they are running 19 a year at current funding levels, but could run upwards of 30 a year at full capacity. So there's a little bit of a kind of funding backlog that we found. And I mentioned Spokane, there is a bit of a kind of crunch, a burden that's put on folks from Eastern Washington who have to commute in to Belia. There are dormitory facilities, but when we visited last December, the facilities were full, and they were actually housing some recruits at nearby hotels. So that's a big burden. It is paid for by essentially the tuition for Belia is paid by the sending agency, so the police forces who hired and who are sending the recruits there. So while some local recruits will commute in and out of Belia, folks from further away are going to have to rely on those dormitories. And so there is kind of a question of, there's only 2 Belia cohorts held in Spokane currently. So that's about 60 recruits, and I think they train upwards of 300 to 400 a year between Spokane and Burien. So there's a bit of a need for some sort of facility in Eastern Washington to alleviate some of that. And surprisingly, at least for the CSW team, we didn't really think about this going in, is we found that there are gaps in foundational skills among the officers entering Belia. And so that, we talked pretty candidly with the instructors and some of the TAC officers, and they're just seeing an upward trend of more and more of the recruits are just lacking kind of foundational reading, writing, and numeracy skills. Something that is incredibly important because the note taking and the kind of case management.
So we're talking foundational skills like reading, writing, arithmetic, analytical thinking,
problem solving, critical thinking. That kind of.
So when you said that some of this increase appears to be because of hiring requirements, is that CJTC's belief, or did you go and look at the hiring requirements and see that all of a sudden?
Some of this, a lot of this did come from the CJTC. We spoke with a few departments that we were able to get in touch with, just about. It's not necessarily that they're hiring for quality candidates, but it might be that they've dropped their associate degree requirement and now it's just a high school degree requirement. But yeah, to your point, we weren't able to kind of do a large survey there, so it is still in terms of offhand comment, CSW, we focus on workforce development research broadly across industries, and this was interesting to find here in terms of Shalia and law enforcement, but not necessarily surprising because it's something that we're also seeing in other industries. Those low foundational skills, and as you're entering a career path that is more and more relying on technology and security, all this stuff, it's, you know, the gap is kind of, it's widening from one level, and it might be widening from the other level as well, if that makes sense.
How different is that category of new officers? How much are they different from the people who've been there 14 or 15 or 16 years? Does anyone look at their numeracy or reading and writing skills to see if it's comparable?
So that's a very good question. One thing that we found, and why a lot of this is kind of fuzzy in our findings, is that there's no assessment once you enter Belia, once you enter Belia, you're hired by your home agencies and you're sent to police academy. There's no entrance exam to set a baseline. And so it's actually kind of challenging. A lot of it is anecdotal in nature. And there's a bit of a push and pull, because we were talking with folks at CJTC. We're also talking with some agencies that, say, well, my new recruit comes back and you're supposed to teach them how to take case notes, and he comes back and can't take case notes. There's a little bit of a push and pull there that was hard to kind of navigate through. But we keep coming back to, do you have baseline assessment numbers? Those just don't exist.
So that goes back to my question about learning objectives.
Yes.
If you don't have learning objectives and outcomes that you're trying to teach to, then.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
How do you assess?
Yeah, how do you assess?
So
Yes.
the baseline exists at publicsafetytesting.com, and those gateway organizations or vendors that we use.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your experience in Yakima was the same way. We used to use our own internal testing process that consisted of a written test, a visual assessment, and some other things. We went away from that because it wasn't cost effective, and we were driving people away from a career with our agency because it was so focused on natural resources and conservation enforcement. So public safety testing, as part of their entrance exam, does a written assessment. That is probably the baseline that you're referring to. Did you talk to them?
We did not, and a lot of what we found is because it was all localized, and to be able to talk to them, we would have to. It's even working with all of the agencies that contract with that system, as opposed to a central body, and so we weren't able to get that inroad to be able to do that. I think that's part of the challenge. Is there's a lot of that happens at the local level, and trying to figure out what the baseline is with different agencies who, it makes sense that they have different focuses and requirements, but trying to develop a consistent baseline.
Well, with regard to your third bullet,
Yeah.
up until September 2017, we required a 4-year degree to hire with our agency. We dropped that requirement under pressure from a director who is no longer with us, who wanted us to fill our vacancies because vacancy rate savings were biting us on the rear end. Nonetheless, what we're experiencing now is we're 2 years into this where we require either an associate's degree or 3 years of military service or 3 years of natural resource experience. So if you're a biologist or something like that with another agency, we will count that rather than education. And what we are finding is when we put our new officers into field training, they are failing. They cannot write a report. They cannot keep notes. They can't stay on task. Their defensive tactics are abysmal. Officer safety is compromised. And we are losing a higher percentage of new officers now. And I believe that we can tie it back to the point where we lessened our education requirements coming through the door. So the evidence that you're seeking, the research and data points we have, would be in our field training officer program, because we keep, obviously, like any police department, we have a very specific field training program where data is carefully entered among field training officers, so we can, because ultimately what happens is the officer fails and is forced out or fired. So I guess getting to your third bullet, I can validate that that is occurring. They do not have the skills they need to survive in this profession.
Right. Excellent. I appreciate that comment.
And let me just add on to what you're saying, and I agree, I know our washout rate in Yakima for 16 weeks of field training is about 20%, so 1 in 5, which is terrible. But I think over the years, what we've seen, when I took the test 30 years ago, there were like 200 people that applied for one position, and now we're getting 10.
Yeah.
So what you see is, instead of hiring people that were testing in the mid 90th percentile, we're picking up people who just passed. And that's the difference in your skill set.
I agree.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's kind of what we were seeing a little bit. We had some kind of assumptions there, but yeah, I think it's a combination of the requirements, but also the pipeline of the people we have coming in. And we weren't quite, that was, I mentioned in the beginning, trying to figure out what the causal element there, but why there's not that robust pool ready to go. It's still something that we were kind of left unfound in this research, unfortunately.
Hey, Linda. Yeah, leads to, the question I had in my mind is, you mentioned previously a lack of qualified applicants. And my question was, is that due to a large number of applicants not having the appropriate qualifications, or just a lack of applicants?
It's a little bit of both. What we were.
Hey, Linda.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm sorry, and I'll add this comment and go back on mute. This is Steve with TIG. Just to offer something from a vendor perspective, again, the solution that we are selling to law enforcement agencies is designed to promote psychological health. And one of the value propositions we're talking about is reducing officer attrition. What we are hearing consistently from customers and potential customers is that the job market is such that for many states where a bachelor's degree is required of an officer, or that many of them already have a bachelor's degree, that with the employment situation the way it is, they can go make more money, same or more money with less stress elsewhere. So that's one reason we're being successful in tools that are helping them retain people by helping them reduce stress. But what we're hearing from the agencies is that they are really scrambling into new territory for them. For example, trying to teach financial literacy to young officers because they've had high turnover and they've got officers in their 20s and 30s experiencing divorces and don't know how to balance a checkbook. So I'm kind of pigpiling on the general comments, but what I'm hearing from a vendor perspective is that it's a combination of the job market being so tight and those people in those high-stress jobs that are highly intelligent, highly qualified with degrees, they can go elsewhere very easily.
and guys, that was Steve Vincent, who is, of course, our private sector.
Yeah, that's very helpful insight, Steve. I think something kind of what we're hearing, that's something we're also seeing is that we have such a tight labor market. One of the kind of downsides of the tight labor market is such a tough competition. So if you can make the same or more somewhere else in a less stressful environment, and that's what you want.
And guys, hold that thought, because we're losing criminal justice programs. Skagit is potentially closing. There have been other discussions in other places, and so there's the issue of having the type of recruit and the people that we need is getting more and more dire.
And, more agencies, there's a higher need for officers.
Yes. Well, and a higher skill level for,
I don't know if you've looked into this, but was there anything about the politicking between CJTC and the other places or the agencies of, you can't, watch one of my people out who already spent $50,000 on this individual. Having worked at CJTC, I had felt that pressure.
Yeah, it came, I would say that we kind of avoided going down that rabbit hole because it seems pretty politically contentious, but there definitely is a little bit of a politicking of just that, of, I give you a tech officer this much time, like, I need them back, or, my recruit's been waiting 3 months, I need them on the force now, like, there's a lot of that going on, and
My other question is up on the first bullet,
Yeah.
when you said that, you could have 30 cohorts a year, but you only have funding for 19. If we already have a lower number of commissioned officers out on the streets and we have all this backlog, don't we have to pull more officers off the streets in order to do some of that work?
I would have to double check. We did a cost analysis of that, and it's a little bit of a yes and. Yes, I think it's more of it would be a smaller lift than, say doubling the current staff load. I think that there's some latent capacity in the current instructor pool, but we probably would have to pull some more.
Anna?
Yeah.
I'm wondering in your research and conversations, have you come across any information on how much money is appropriated for outreach and promotion? Whether you've done it by state or did you come across it?
No, we didn't.
That's
That's a really good question.
And the answer to that is not much.
But yeah, my guess is not much.
That's one of the jobs that the center, of course, tries to do, and we get, minimal funding and by hook and by crook that we spend most of our time trying to publicize and let people know. But
Yeah, we looked at, appropriations for training, and that's very minimal as well,
Yeah,
so that's a good question.
But the colleges, well, Bobby, and you can answer from your college perspective. How much of your budget gets allocated to promotion? So she's not speaking, folks, so that could give you a.
I don't have a budget, I'll say that.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, Linda, Steve, I'm gonna have to drop. I have not been able to quite hear all the conversation, but I'll offer one last comment that may be helpful. Just listening to some of the discussion around research and around what evidence exists for some stuff with law enforcement. One of the organizations that I have gotten plugged into is the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing. And again, an organization that is made up largely of police officers, but also folks with a research background. One of the folks I talked to is a police officer with a large California police department who has a PhD in organizational psychology, and he's one of the key players there. So that is an organization. I don't know how large it is, but I've seen a lot of good stuff coming out from them on evidence-based practices, including stuff around training, et cetera.
Thanks, Steve. That's good. We'll try, if you can send me that in an email link, and then I'll try to make an outreach.
Will do. Hey, I got to drop, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. The next section I'm probably going to breeze through. It's, we did an assessment and had some discussions around offering the current CTC system. That's your wheelhouse. So, and we did this work in November and December of last year, so I already know what the kind of the curriculum. I'm not sure what you're calling it, but the kind of the aligning of the different criminal justice or curriculum. Like, I know that's kind of gone ahead and like way past when we saw it last. So for that sake, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I think there's probably been a lot more evolution since our report was published.
Yeah, and we'll be updating folks.
Yeah.
Bobby and I on that.
But we looked at kind of just the diverse offerings, and our focus was really on basic law enforcement training. Of course, criminal justice programming goes far and wide beyond that. But we found that 34 colleges offering some sort of criminal justice program, and just the breadth of the degree types, everything from a certificate all the way to kind of those 4-year pathways. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we found that when we focused in on law enforcement, we found 4 schools that had some sort of formal law enforcement program. I believe that included Hughes, Gadget, my brain's a little foggy with the exact programs, but those were either some sort of associate's degree in policing or law enforcement specific, or it's Gadget where they have the Reserve Academy and the federal officer academy.
we've actually got, or we had, 20 programs that offer, through the community college system, that offer AA degrees.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then some other certificates and such, but yeah.
And this is what I'm going to skip over, but the work that the Center of Excellence was doing around the core curriculums. I put a note here that said that we turned in our report to them in January, so you guys are probably leagues ahead of where it was at the time. But when Ryan and I were last in touch with the program managers, we were really diving into looking at those master course outlines and looking at the learning objectives and competencies and how do you match them across the campuses. And I speaking with Linda last week, I think you said that you kind of wrapped up that phase. And
yeah, we have got we actually did reach agreement on for 19 of the 20 programs. Reached agreement on the 5 core. Help me, Bobby. 5 core competencies that
5 core
courses that all of the programs will offer.
Right.
And then they can also offer a variety of other things on top of that, but everybody will offer the 5 kind of core.
Absolutely. Great. And I know how hard it is to get 20 folks to come together on that. So to get 19 out of 20 is amazing. Part of our data collection around this is we did some, so we spoke with the program managers meeting, we did a presentation and had some discussion around folks' thoughts about the current BOLIA training, some, what their insight was there. We also talked to some faculty, and we surveyed deans of criminal justice programs across the colleges just to get their input on where they felt BOLIA was and how they could see it fitting into a community college system if it can. And I think there, it was really great discussions. Folks, folks see some potential benefits, but there's also kind of some concerns or challenges that would take to really for community colleges to take a larger role in BOLIA. By and large, everyone felt that there's such a benefit to the academics, the rigor, the learning outcomes that students get in the classroom setting that would be beneficial to BOLIA, especially in light of some of the things that we're hearing about foundational skills gaps. It was a kind of a push and pull a little bit. There were some concerns about affordability. So if we thought about on the most kind of drastic change would be taking BOLIA out of CJTC and putting it into one or more community colleges and making it a tuition-based model. So there were some concerns about the affordability of that tuition, even with things like Pell or other sorts of financial aid. What does that look like and what does that mean to the students and what students are able to access that kind of program if they're expected to self-pay. I think this is true across many organizations, but just an increased administrative capacity, increased faculty load, faculty workload, hiring challenges, things of that nature. There was some concerns about just the gaps in physical infrastructure, some questions around, the standards and quality enforcement as you start to decentralize training. And it was interesting when we talked more with the faculty. I think they thought more. They in their heads it was more around the hiring challenges, some of the capacity challenges, and so there was a little more hesitation there about is this something that's really feasible. Whereas when we talk to deans, and again I think this is knowing coming from a community college background, knowing that there's just different viewpoints and different personalities there, deans could see a benefit to to immersing police recruits into the wider college environment. So there came up actually across the board when we talked to folks this idea of community policing and if you see, we saw this a little bit when we were looking at like Minnesota as a case study where all their training is on community college campuses. It's, while police recruits still might be somewhat separated from the rest of the wider college campus, there's still some benefit to seeing your peers in their training. That was, I think, a big benefit. We heard that most from the deans, but I think we actually heard that from everyone that we spoke to in the course of this research. And then finally, we looked at two models and we did some cost benefit analysis of this. I will say that this was where my colleague Ryan spent most of his time. I kind of fed the research to develop this, so I can walk through them, but and answer questions. But I will say that this is a little where I'm a little on the shakier side. So we looked at, what would be the cost, and this was really one of the state's questions for us, is what would be the cost and of actually taking the Central Academy and making regional academies. And so we put together a model where we proposed four regional academies. One would still be the CJTC and their facility in Burien. One could potentially be a college of Skagit that already has some facilities. One would be the facilities that already exist in Spokane in partnership with like Spokane Community College, for example. And then there was another kind of Central Eastern Washington campus that was a kind of TBD, because they're, as far the campuses we chose first and foremost really have the physical building facilities, and then we said there probably would need to be a fourth, and that would be more the TBD. So we looked at that. We did some cost analysis. Unsurprisingly, it's very cost prohibitive to do that in the short term. And it really doesn't solve the backlog issue, which came up time and again as one of the more pressing issues facing basic law enforcement training here in the state. So the second model we looked at is, we said, okay, in talking with the colleges and talking with the folks, we fear that there might be some sort of foundational skills gap. The colleges already have this core curriculum that's been vetted, that has learning outcomes. And we see a benefit to kind of having that academic rigor there. Could there be some sort of model where we could leverage that community college curriculum, perhaps in like an IBEST model or something similar to that? That really does, the IBEST model really does focus on that kind of those foundational skill building in context. Could you do something similar to that for new officers entering the LEA? And there could be an opportunity there to shorten the training time and improve the academic outcomes. So we thought that was an interesting model. We did some cost analysis around it, but we really kind of, the thorn there is really getting the folks together to have those discussions. And while from our research it seems like it could be a good model, there were a couple other states where we saw some similar, not necessarily as formalized as this, but we did see that there's a lot of states where if you have done if you've done criminal justice course work at the college level, you could you can get credit, kind of like a credit transfer when you enter the LEA. So yes, the big challenge here, and what I'll kind of leave it off at, is it really does require the buy-in from all parties involved to be able to do this. It seems like it could be a benefit, but doing the actual collaboration is always a kind of question mark whether or not that's feasible.
So does your study recommend a hybrid pre-academy model?
We do. We recommend exploring that option.
Our next slide will show that.
Yes, my next slide will show that. So this is, again, apologies for the small text. This table can be found in the full report. It also has so it looks at the benefits and risks. And these are our two proposed models. We also do a benefits and risks of the status quo model. So we do really, we feel that, this kind of what we're calling a pre-academy could really reduce instruction time at the CJTC. We estimated upwards of 100 hours of instruction if you really do kind of that pairing of the curriculum, and could save, upwards of 20 to 30K per cohort, just in instruction, and then the subsequent housing and meal costs during those hours. So, we're kind of proposing that this could be a way, if you're reducing the cost and reducing the time that a recruit stays at Bolivia, you could potentially run more cohorts. And, really advocating for, the college credits that would be awarded to a police recruit who does this pre-academy model that would then be used later on in their own professional career development. Yeah, so that's kind of the back. I don't want to read through all of this, but I don't want to waste the time doing that. But we really see this as kind of a way to address the challenges that we found, the foundational skills gap, the backlog issue. And then also, we talked about there's a little bit of a burden for folks in the eastern side of the state having to commute in. Doing something like a pre-academy model where you're reducing the time you have to commute, you're reducing the cost of potentially being able to offer more cohorts, and you're providing kind of rigorous academic instruction that can help to build up that, fill that foundational gap. We saw that as a kind of a best way forward. That's kind of all I have, but I'm happy to entertain questions and discussion.
Does your recommendation, does that kind of shift costs from the state, which pays for all training now, to the recruit and the home agencies? Because I get a feeling that just because the state is the state, that their whole goal here is to see what's cheaper for them.
Absolutely, I mean, yes. So, yeah, and that's in the full report as a notice in the burden, especially, so with current training, the state does pay for training, but the local agencies do kick in.
Yeah, it's very small amounts.
But they also pay the full salary for their recruit while
Yes.
there. Yeah, we saw that, but yeah, moving to something like this would, and it is a tuition-based model, would really put the onus on the student. And there's, again, some challenges there in terms of, who can access, who has the ability to afford that, how it is financially and can financially fill any of those gaps. So that is the downside, I think, to that is taking the responsibility, the cost responsibility from the state and putting it onto the student.
Yeah, I would say it's particularly difficult, just my experiences in Yakima, we're trying to recruit heavily from minority, in our case, Hispanic communities. That would make it impossible. You'd never get anybody.
Right.
Any other questions for Anna? Anna, thank you. That was very thorough, and I really actually appreciate the fact that you were the researcher. And so, yeah, you come with some other kind of insights that are really kind of helpful. So what if, Bobby, what are your thoughts? Because you and I are kind of the co-chair leads here of trying to move forward with our community college work group.
Well, my first thought was before was I think that the major players never at the table with us.
Right.
So I really think the CJTC needs to have a place at the table to have these conversations. One of the things that I just totally got excited about, thanks Anna, having ran the corrections officer program at Pierce College, of creating a short IBEST program, maybe a quarterly program, that would be efficient for the colleges to do, that could bring people in, that would be IBEST on your English. We can put that into the history of policing so we can get some of those other courses through before they go forward, that students could do whether they wanted to go into law enforcement or not. So I think that there's ways to play with it, but I don't think it's, I always get excited and then don't have everybody here. So then I don't want to get too excited and have the stake of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, if one of our goals, and I think it should be, is to get all the players together in the room and start playing for the ultimate outcome for the state, because right now we've got a situation where we're putting people and systems in jeopardy, and we don't want to be doing that. And so I think we can get all the players there, and I think we do have some opportunities with the fact that we've got some new players at CJCP, right? Yeah.
I think the other thing is, no matter what we do, I think it's gonna be slower before it goes. We just have to know that, if we start a new process, it's not gonna fix everything in 6 months. It's gonna fix things maybe in a year or two, unless we just replicate what we already have, just go over Spokane and try to make that, do it over there, the same way we're already doing it. But if we did that, it sounds like other agencies has talked, that I've heard talk, they wouldn't like the outcome anyway. Does that make sense? Because their recruits are not coming out with what they want them to have. So I don't have an answer, I'm sorry.
Well, you
I have
have,
a lot of questions.
yeah, well, questions do lead to answers. So, we have got guys, scheduled, Bobby and I and Cindy, the 24th of January.
Yep.
I'm looking at Kelly to make sure that, at Highline, to hold, the criminal justice work group meeting and try to bring as many of our criminal justice programs to that meeting or get them on Zoom or whatever. And so to talk about partly what we learned from the study and also about the gaps and the issues that we have and how we can encourage. And at that point, we do want to figure out how to invite CJCT and get them excited about joining with us to have better outcomes for both the state and for our students and for our citizens. So, because we don't need to, we potentially have lost the Skagit program. That's, I talked with Bill already, who used to, of course, run the Skagit program for many years. And he does not know whether whether the president of the college is interested in salvaging the program and bringing it back. They right now are just kind of on a limping along issue. So, which is really sad because that was really one of our premier programs. Board member thoughts?
Is the training commission interested, or are they protecting their service? Well, we work with the training commission, we know how things work.
I'm betting that they're not talking because they're not interested. I have a question for you. The people who commissioned this study, the lawmakers that asked you to do this, are they still in office?
I don't know, I know that part of the provider that was in there was that we were to present to legislatures, and that we tried to get that on the books several times, and it's really pushed back.
So the assumption is the legislative support dried up?
I don't quote me on this, but probably, yeah. I mean,
So
or
nobody's really
the
listening?
prioritization.
And any interest from WACOPS or WASPIC? Because they're really the big players. They're the ones that pay the bills for chiefs and sheriffs.
This is hard for me because my former colleague Ryan, he was in touch with WASPIC. We were in talks with possibly presenting or getting some feedback there, and that, at least from my perspective, I was in communication, I was completely dried up as well.
I think WASPIC is the key.
I agree.
The commission will not move forward on their own. So WASPIC has the horsepower to give them, but no one else does.
And they've already had their full conference, haven't they?
Uh,
Or they're right in the middle of it now.
yeah.
It's too late to get on their fall agenda. I know I'm asking you questions you probably can't answer, I'm
They're
sorry.
good questions, but I could probably figure out who we were in touch with. It wasn't me personally, but I could figure out who we were in touch with, maybe see if I called them.
My recommendation is to reach out to WASPIC and Lacey and find out if you can get on their agenda and meet with the president of WASPIC, because without WASPIC support, I don't think that you're going to derive the success you hope to achieve. Walk-ups is similar, but I don't think that they have as much influence as Boston. Would you agree?
Bobby, what do you think?
Can't hurt, more people at the table, more great ideas.
I think my direct experience of working with CJCT was limited because they were pretty fearful about, I got identified as the overthrower of the system. Linda wants to overthrow your system. And of course, that was not the case, but that was how it got kind of played during the time that the initial study was happening. And so, yeah, I got a couple death threats, but other than that, folks, it was just really not a big deal. It was pretty, yeah, people were pretty upset and fearful, and so I made sure that I demonstrated a different behavior, and that was not my intent, was to overthrow anyone. It was to really look at what are our outcomes, are we meeting our needs of our state? That's what the job of the community college system is to look at, you know, are we doing the job that we need to be doing for our students and our industry, et cetera, et cetera. And so I made no real formal attempts to outreach until after the study was done, and then we all talked so that we could do it together. And it would be, and I think that maybe CJCT now, with a little bit of time under their belt, and I think that there is some movement with the people and changes in that system, that they also would be more amenable to listening and talking and seeing how we could work together. Because I think that's really where it's at. So, but you think that, I've got written on my little notebook here that we need to do an outreach to WASPIC. Okay?
What is the goal? Is it to, I mean, I can see a couple goals. Is it to decrease the cost for the state, which I'm sure is the state's goal? Or is it to not have agencies paying, and I know we paid officers for 5 months waiting to go to the academy before you could pay them for 3 more months to go to the academy. So almost a year in pay just to sit around. And they're out washing cars and doing other, you know, is it because that's what the chiefs want? That's what the sheriffs and the chiefs would want. You know, or is it to make better police officers generally, which is nice, but how do you do that? Because I know that the training commission is not set up to teach, you know, like basic English.
Right.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, but those are competing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what happens for me, at least as a community college manager, is I need to make sure I'm protecting the state's investment and make sure I'm giving the industry what they want and doing it in a way that allows all the students to come in and somehow get through it as much as possible. I think that CJTC wants to keep their power. I think the state wants to save money, and I think citizens want to be on the beat.
I think that's one of those where you can only pick 2. I don't think you get to pick all 3.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, at Highline, 40% of what we do is getting people to college level English and math. I mean, that's our big push, and I think all the community colleges can offer that. And that sounds like the big issue of people not having those basic skills and just adult learning. So that's, I think all the community colleges can help with that. We've been fortunate that we're neighbors to the CJTC. And on the back end, we get to have those students on campus in uniform because we only have about, I think, 9 security officers on campus for 80 acres. A lot of times you only got one person on duty that's actually an employee of the college. The rest of the time we're relying on those student officers to help police this. So I think there's some partnerships that aren't being fully utilized, maybe on the other side of the state or something. So that's another direction.
Could one of the pushes be maybe, since you've been such a gap to get in to the academy, during that time frame, you could go out and say, have the students either go to college or online and get some classes during that time?
That just comes down to the cost.
At the
More
cost.
cost and availability, because then, depending on how you set it up, if you're not at the start of a quarter,
Right.
how do you do that? And then that depends, because, remember, you've got agencies all over the state. Some with community colleges not really all that close, coming from the east side.
That's why we could promote the online or even like the military. I've done the Fort Lewis and all that, and those classes, you did at your own pace too. I mean, they promoted, you had 6 weeks or 8 weeks to do that class, but you could finish it in 2 weeks.
Well, I mean,
So, you could,
they're paid employees, you could definitely set that requirement. Probably, I don't know what on fishing agencies, but I know that we probably got 30% with 4-year degrees coming in.
Yeah, up until recently. I mean, when we changed our entrance requirements or application qualifications, we appeal to military folks pretty readily because of the nature of the work we do. But some of the problems that we're talking about, or if you're hiring, we've got very creative with trying to keep people in our hiring process. For example, if the state patrol can hire the applicant tomorrow, but I can't put him in the academy until next week, the applicant goes to the patrol. And then you get into this thing that we affectionately call Operation Steal a Cop. And it's the end game of, well, if they want to hire you now, we'll take you in 3 weeks. And these folks they're just playing the system. They just want to get into BLEA. They really don't care. Because they know that 3 years down the road, they're going to lateral to whatever agency they want to go to, as long as they don't mess up. So, and I think this thing was commissioned really because enough chiefs and sheriffs complained about the lengthy wait times to get into BLEA. And BLEA responded by adding staff, and they also opened up the Spokane Academy. They reopened it. So now I think they're running the Spokane Academy twice a year. Yeah, so, and they also, the legislature relieved the budget or the outlay expenditures on our budgets at the agency level. So now I think they fully funded. But we still get into that thing where, okay, Tacoma, Seattle, those big organizations, they get 90% of the slots and the quotas in those classes. And I will say that CJTC has been very good about helping smaller agencies out by trying to reserve seats for us and stuff, but they only have so much that they can do, what they're working with. And there's only so many TAC officers available, and TAC officers come and go. So I'm frustrated because there's a lot of data in this, and there was a lot of effort put into this, and it doesn't sound like the people that originally asked for it are even remotely interested in the outcome. So how do we gain support if they're not there anymore and they're listening?
Well, and part of it is I think that there's some things that have happened to create that gap just over the course of the year since the study was done, and it's like Ryan Davis having left, and Ryan was very familiar with kind of and willing to facilitate some opportunities, but he's no longer with the organization to do that. But we've also had changes in folks that have been on the ground floor of working on the study to begin with. I think that we can, with just some outreach, I think with WASAP and actually reaching, out to CJCT and others, if we do it in the right way And we also have got some changes in CJCT, and it sounds like Bobby knows the new education coordinator or director, who is, blanking on her name, used to be with State Patrol.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So we think that that is a glimmer of,
She's good. She's good.
yeah, that, because Bobby knows her and others know her, that we could, do the initial, please come dance with us and see what we can do. Because the outcomes for doing a better job for the state is what we want. And we want to make, the risk analysis on what's happening at the local level and the liability that we're creating for local counties and cities, et cetera, when their officers screw up it's just that cost alone, in comparison to if we were doing a better job with our training and learning outcomes and what we want, there's definitely some risk assessment here that could demonstrate it would be cost effective to do a lot better job than where we're at right now. So.
If you won't get an argument from me, there's a training committee at WASPIC. They have committees for everything. I would start that.
Okay.
If you go on their webpage, you just give they have an administrative assistant that's in the office every day. If you just start there, she can get you on the agenda for the spring conference.
Okay, well, and I happen to know the attorney that used to advise WASPEC, who worked with me on 211 board, and so he's willing to also help outreach, and he's still in contact with folks. But Bobby, don't you think that if we reached out to Monica and company and we come with our olive branch, that we could get some?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, next week.
Okay.
2 weeks.
Next week's not Thanksgiving, no?
No.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's late, it is late. Anna, thank you so much. This was a really tough process to kind of walk through and yeah. So for those folks online, are there any of you, I see Scott, you're still on, and Dan, are you still on? Do you guys have some questions or comments? Kelly, can you tell whether they have?
This is Scott. I don't have any questions or comments. I mean, although I have worked in a law enforcement agency, I didn't work for the law enforcement agency. When I first started working at University of Washington Emergency Management, they didn't have any room for me at the administration building, so I spent a year at my desk next to detectives. But other than that, I'm afraid I don't have much to offer as far as a career path for a law enforcement officer. I'm glad that you guys are having the conversation, though.
Dan? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Lorraine is on
Lorraine has
too.
no questions.
No questions.
I'll just add one last thing, because I have to run, I got another meeting. Linda mentioned, I'm only at CSW for a couple more weeks. I have a new job at King County. Very excited to move from consultant to back to a legal office job. But Linda has my contact information. I'm happy to, I will have very limited capacity to do more presentations or anything, but if you still need the point of contact to answer questions or things like that, I'm still around.
Okay, that's great, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because you really do have a body of knowledge that, and exposure to the discussions that none of the rest of us were privy to.
Yeah.
And so that, just being able to pick your brain on those kinds of things, and where we can make sure that we don't step on landmines that are existing. So.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Congratulations
Yeah.
on your new position.
I was wondering, Anna,
You're in it.
In your research, sir, did you come across like any data? How many openings on a typical year? State officers, the county sheriff's department, the city, and then the fish and game.
Yeah, I'm pulling up my computer because I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but give me a second. I think I do have that information. It will have been dated. I would have pulled this data from December of last year. Second.
This is the part where we stare at you.
I know. It's funny because I definitely had all of these pulled up on my screen last night when I was preparing. And then, so let's see. This is not necessarily job openings, but 11,000 commissioned officers, this is 2017 data. 11,000 officers with an additional 4,700 civilian positions. There's 260 separate agencies, which includes local, state, tribal, university agencies. They span from the smallest agency of 2 officers to Seattle, which has 1,400 data. I did look into job posts. We've got some workforce development databases that we can look at job openings, but it's really for advertised job openings, and we go to the police officer that doesn't seem to be a good proxy for the number of positions open. They just might have one posting that's just continually open, as opposed to posting each of those opportunities. So when we looked at this data, we found 116 agencies that had advertising for positions in the last year, but didn't quite have a good handle on the exact number of positions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.